Welcome everyone. Thank you for for attending this webinar, which is the NSF supported uh, webinar that was organized through a proposal with Matt Arts and myself on AI and anthropology. We've been working with the SFAA, who's providing kindly the Zoom for this. And my name is Kiran Jayaram. An associate professor at the University of South Florida. I was recently the 2026 SFAA program chair for those annual meetings in Albuquerque. And I'm also the co-founder and co-chair of the AI and Anthropology Topical Interest Group within the SFAA. What else? I'm also the founding editor-in-chief of the digital publication dispatches from Applied Anthropology through the Society for Applied Anthropology, which we're having, I believe, the official launch will be late summer. Uh, so that is who I am. I'm going to pass on so that our panelists can introduce themselves. And then I'll say a little bit, and then we'll just kind of start the conversation about faculty and program readiness. So, uh, panelists.
I'll go first then. Hi everyone. My name is Evan Fruhoff. I am a assistant librarian here at the University of South Florida. I work with Kieran pretty consistently within the research capacity. I lead a lot of our AI instruction for the library, specifically its usage within research methods, as well as supporting and consulting with faculty members, specifically of how they can implement it effectively within their coursework. So I'm really excited to be here today, share a little bit of insights about how it's affecting the research space and specifically where this can plug into the classroom.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'll go next. Elizabeth Bryady. I'm co-chair of the Anthropology Career Readiness Network, and through that role have had a lot of contact with faculty across the U.S., visiting their campuses and helping them to develop customized career readiness plans for their departments. And so I have some knowledge of faculty's concerns about AI.
Hi everyone, my name is Laura Koicheva. I'm assistant professor, the chair of technical science studies at Brandenburg Technical University in Germany. I'm an anthropologist by training. What else? I'm a founder of a venture called Robots Actually, which has a vision of preparing society to live with robots.
Alrighty. Wonderful. And thank you, panelists, for taking the time and being a part of this initiative. The initiative, just to give some general context in case this is your first time joining us, is, as I said, that Matt Arts and I put together a grant through the National Science Foundation Cultural Anthropology Program to support engagement of anthropologists with AI. And as we conceptualize it, there are three ways in which generally people can do that as anthropologists. One, it can be as this sort of taking technology and the infrastructure involved as an object and studying AI as an object, whether it's the data centers, whether it's Elon Musk's desire to colonize the moon and use satellite links to mitigate climate issues or whatnot, studying it as an object. The second would be to study it and understand it and engage with it as a student or faculty or practitioner. So as a tool, right? And the third way would be to bring uh, anthropological understandings to bear upon the development and creation of AI itself, working with industry, working with engineers and developers. And so those are the kind of three ways that we see, Matt and I see as ways in which anthropologists can engage. Um, and this is not, I don't think that this is a distinct approach in the fact that this is not an apologist position that we are not saying, AI is going to save us, and this is not the approach that we're taking. It's very much a social science approach to a new thing, right? There are bad things and there are good things, and let's be social scientists about this thing and look at systems thinking and whatnot. So, but then as we already have some issues going on in higher ed in the US and globally about restructuring and through defunding and funding other things. Um, in higher education, there are also sort of shifts going on. And so this webinar is really geared towards understanding what faculty and programs can do to consider using AI in some sort of way. Um, and so that's the basic point of this webinar. Um, and wanted to start with this sort of institutional pressure backdrop, and that there are, well, for one, just as a point of order, AI is not a singular. We should take this as a plural. There's multiple things when we talk about AI. It's not just a chatbot, right? There have been things that we've been using AI for, you know, arguably for decades, and right, and we use it. If you use Netflix, then there is some AI built into that. I would imagine there's machine vision when you have these sort of steering devices on your cars and saying this is, well, that's, some of that. So we have to be clear about the objects that we're talking about. But within institutions of higher education, some of this it's as an efficiency tool is being integrated. And there are other ways that I can talk about later about how I'm working to integrate it. Um, but I just wonder what sort of, from your all respective positions, panelists, what sort of institutional pressure do you see AI, if at all, in your specific context?
Well, Kieran, I'll go ahead and kick us off. I think one of the things that we've seen across the board is that there are a range of disciplines that are leveraging AI in totally different ways. And so at many institutions, we've seen this odd pressure where there's this push to adopt this and to put it in the forefront, especially if it's trendy or if it's bringing in, donations or excitement in programs. But every program and every discipline at that rate is using this technology a little differently. There's certain restrictions, there's certain expectations. And so for many of these institutions, I've seen a lot of consistent concerns where they're not really putting up good policies or protections across the board. They're trying to let it kind of be unleashed a little bit. For example, our business programs at USF or across, other state universities, they want to leverage these technologies. They want to implement them into classes. Our own here at USF, we have our own AI college, and they're definitely not going to stop using AI. And they definitely don't want to even restrict usage at that rate. Unfortunately, though, that means that most of the push is going without a lot of guidance. It's going without a lot of policy. Not to mention, a lot of the initial pushes of these AI platforms are not necessarily by our own leadership in the university. It's from corporations first. Most people weren't given a training at most institutions on AI. They still haven't been. And many folks are utilizing a tool set that was just pushed on them either by third parties through ad content, or it's an institutional license to something like a Microsoft Copilot, a Google Gemini. And it creates a really uneven playing field, which puts a lot of pressure on the faculty and students alike to handle this kind of zeitgeist shift quite rapidly without any support.
So,
I'll just, oh,
go ahead.
okay. I'm Elizabeth. I'll just say that one of the things I'm consistently hearing from faculty is pressure to integrate AI into courses, into how the department operates. And the reaction is fairly standoffish. There are a lot of concerns that anthropology professors articulate related to ethical issues surrounding AI. And and my impression is that they don't quite know how to manage the push that they're getting. They don't know quite how to respond in the most effective way. And they're feeling uncomfortable, unsure of themselves in terms of what their response should be.
I think the context that I'm in is perhaps quite different. Being in Europe, obviously, we do have the newly instituted AI Act across the board. If anything, I would say, and I'm not speaking here on behalf of my employer in any way, just the way, just my own practice and experience. I would say if there is pressure in my case, I think it's trying to align what the students are doing and how they are adopting the technology in their own educational activities. Sometimes quite creative, I have to say, and trying to interface that with whatever policies are in place, or very often not quite in place um, on behalf of the university. And then because there's the AI Act, I think, at least in the German context, there's also been, there's starting to pop up some legal cases, not only for universities, but also for high schools, where people have gone to court over the question of, is it transparent? How is AI used in assignments? Should it be disclosed? Should it not be disclosed? Should it be, right? And I think that's also starting to crop up now in the US. I think there was a case in some law school in California, which I now forget, but essentially they came out with a policy where they say you cannot use it, you cannot feed it anything that, no class notes, no slides, nothing. And they have to define. So I think it's a very fragmented landscape, at least, from where I'm standing.
Laura, could you say a little bit more about the AI Act? Because that's a European issue, correct?
It's a European issue. Essentially, it's the European Union's response to the way these technologies are rolled out. And very briefly, the one-liner is it's essentially concerned with the transparency and data protection issues, and what programs are high risk, what are absolutely prohibited to use, such as like real-time biometric data gathering in public places, all of that. So, yeah,
Good.
it
And
really is concerned with how data is used in the training and the deployment of these programs.
and Evan, in case the attendees are interested, Evan has put
Yeah.
kindly the link in the chat to the high-level summary if people are wanting to read more. So good. Yeah, I mean, I just on this, I think it's also interesting to think about the other things that faculty are expected to do, right? Right. I mean, it seems to me like the secret thing when I was first starting out was the secret thing is we're supposed to be able to teach, although we were trained to be researchers, not teachers, right? So we have to learn how to teach. And then now it's like, okay, well, there's AI, and if you're in Florida or places like this, now we're apparently, according to current law, we're going to have to be trained on security and active shooters and things like this. And so we're just being heaped on these other sorts of things. So I think just in a broader context, as far as higher ed, oftentimes we're being given more things to do without any training, guidance, money to pursue those things. Um, think it's an important sort of institutional picture. So given all those, what do we think would be a meaningful first step that doesn't require a new hire or a new course?
Kieran, I'd love to introduce something that we've been doing in the libraries. It's not a new concept, I don't think, to anthropologists and social scientists collectively, but it's the idea of the community practice. At USF libraries, and I've seen this across the country in different teams and departments. The idea of like bringing everyone together and having dialogues so that you can be in charge of your own policy making, your own decision making, and also like taking a critical evaluation for your field of these tools has proven really, really helpful for a lot of folks. We don't have that space, and admittedly that is a pull, but we just do an hour a month, and we've been doing that for the last 2 years. That is something that doesn't require any additional costs, but just being able to have a discourse and conversation, I think, is really important. Right now, that discourse without those kind of spaces is either coming from administrators or corporations that are telling students and faculty alike of how to use their tools. I think being able to have discourse from experts who can critically evaluate these tool sets, or at least are attempting to make attempts at critically evaluating those tool sets, I think is one of the easiest ways for us to get involved. It does require us to engage with it, and I will say that has been something I've seen as some faculty and students alike just don't want to engage with this technology. They have ethical concerns. They have maybe they just aren't interested. And so that does hold us back a little bit because even if we disagree with its usage, I think having these conversations are so important. I think more of that we can do, the better we can set ourselves up to critically evaluate these tools going forward.
I agree with that. And I think that interdisciplinary discussions are going to be extremely valuable because you'll find some people use it a particular way and find it extremely helpful. And you may be surprised by that if you come in with a bias against it. But I guess, Evan, I would expand even beyond interdisciplinary and think about, are there ways in which you could get members of the business community, local, say, municipal government or nonprofit professionals to engage with people in higher ed so that they can all talk about it together? Because it seems to me that that's where you're going to get the kinds of perspectives that are out there fully. A lot of what I'm hearing is that professors just don't know why it's important to use AI. They can imagine it's somewhat important, but they're not sure why. And so, therefore, they have questions about, should I even bother teaching students? Or if I teach students, how do I teach students? What do I teach students? I mean, there are just too many questions. And from their point of view, no answers. So, helping them to understand these alternate perspectives of people out in the community right next door to the university, I think would be just a great way to create a bridge, a people bridge to a technology, so that people can at least begin to hear how others are using it, thinking about it, planning for it, etc.
I agree with both what both Evan and Elizabeth said, although I should say I'm perhaps a bit surprised. But again, this is perhaps my context. I think I think that I mean, when you Kiran, when you asked the question, I went into immediately like a very practical, well, this is what you should, look at, and there's a ton of courses that are free online. And, I was trying to evaluate the question from an entirely different point of view as rather than this initial resistance that people have been mentioning. But so my answer would be coming from that perspective. If there's a context where faculty is overwhelmed with a bunch of other trainings they have to do, and they're like the ever increasing, admin tasks that are kind of that keep raining on everybody, and there's ever decreasing funding, right? So the people bridge, I think, is extremely important, but also perhaps extending that into a very hands-on, collaborative, not just a discussion, but also, learning from best practices, creating spaces where, people can really start experimenting. There's a lot of free resources out there, and I'm not gonna, every major provider has, like the skill jar by Anthropic and OpenAI. And if you don't trust the corporates, Stanford has a lot of free resources. So I think perhaps, and I'd be willing to hear actually feedback after that in the Q&A from colleagues, especially in the US context, how they feel, like is there perhaps a space within their day-to-day where they can set up informal groups with colleagues from all the departments and the students, where they can together experiment with this, an experimental mode, play mode, and I've spoken about playing with AI before. I think allows a different entry into how we approach these systems, and the technology, which otherwise might be seen as this kind of thing that is being pushed upon us, right? So that would be my yes to the people bridge, and yes to figuring out how, like to get, hands-on formats that we can do without budget, perhaps over coffee. I don't know, something
Well,
like that.
and Laura, I would just build on that by saying, yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think that experimentation is so important. I think right now, one of the biggest issues we have is we're looking around and saying, we're being told these technologies are helpful for us, but I'm not always seeing those results. And so bringing in either those business leaders or people who are actually using these and pushing them to their limits and like showing deliverables. But on the flip side,
Yeah.
also having people who are skeptics poke holes in them. I always talk about that in the library that like we're gonna poke more holes in these AIs than you will even guess initially. Like I want you to understand why it's having those limits so that you can make a critical evaluation of exactly where to draw the line. And I think having a balance of those people who are actually seeing those results and having people who are really, frankly, trying to drag it down a little bit and poke holes in it, I think allows a much more healthy ecosystem and understanding of the technology. Right
Yeah.
now, it's just like I mentioned before, it's a lot of that kind of corporate talk. It's a lot of sales pitches, and it can do
Yeah.
everything. And there's a lot of range here. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of limits.
Right.
And once we know those, we can actually start using it properly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And actually, I think to follow up on that, I think it's important for anthropology to start poking holes, and we're good at this, but also something that I feel quite strongly about, and I have an article coming out soon, hopefully on that point, is that AI can actually be seen as, I think there needs to be, I think there should be a pivot in the dominant pattern of thinking, that we are, I think, collectively find it more intuitive. I think it's very intuitive for anthropologists to look at, these tools that are being, pushed from corporate entities, and to go into resistance mode. And I'm not saying, that mode is wrong. I am saying we need to rebalance it with a different set of approaches, and I think there needs to be a pivot in practice and perhaps thinking, where it's not just a technology to subvert and resist in your pedagogical and professional practice, but I think it's also a technology to subvert and resist with. And so I think I see AI as, once it's understood, and this is why I say, like I encourage people, if they haven't already, it's not just for grading, it's not just for, the efficiency of the admin tasks that happen, in the day to day. I think it's actually can be incredibly creative tool, to really scale anthropology and to bring its message out in a way that we haven't been able to do so until now. Um, and so I think um, this is the kind of provocation that I'd like to leave with people. I don't want to colonize and expand too much on this, but really see it as a tool that can help anthropology paradoxically. There's a great paper, perhaps I can put it in the chat later, where computer scientists got together and they fed Malinowski to an LLM and I think gamified it. And, how can you teach Malinowski in a different way? And that's coming out of computer science. Why is it not coming out of anthropology? I mean, that's what I want to know. Yeah, I think it can also be very empowering for things that are near and dear to most anthropologists' hearts, like spreading the message of anthropology and the value of anthropology to the world and making it more popular. So,
Well, to that, thank you all
yeah.
for this. I wanted to say a few things as well. One of the things about understanding and the Elizabeth's term "people bridge to a technology" um, is I think you know I guess my bigger comment is we need to treat this as a social science issue. We need to treat this as like we're social scientists. What would we do in this situation, right? Whether it's the crisis of higher ed or whatever, this impending pressure. Why don't we think of this as social scientists rather than uh, individuals under attack? And it's not that we're either or, but it's like let's stop and let that broader sort of thing that put us those wherever we are in industry or in higher ed, we're not that put us there because we were thinking systems thinking, we were thinking about creatively, we're playing and things like this. Let's apply that to this situation. And I think that can be very helpful. But it's also important to have those moments of connection. And one of the projects that um, I'm happy to be collaborating on a team research project with people from Cal State Northridge, Teachers College, and USF, is we're starting a research project to look on what anthropologists, students, and faculty are doing as practitioners as well. What are we doing with AI right now? Um, and just to kind of get a finger on the pulse and understand what's going on so we can have more of these conversations. And that could be a foundation for uh, many things. So that's one thing that I'm working on with a team. There's also something I'm working on. I just started in the past few days. I tried to do it by myself and couldn't figure it out. I tried to play. Sometimes playing doesn't work. Evan knows I've been trying to develop a course companion, very much what Laura had mentioned, for my cultural anthropology classes, where I set something up that's specific to that class. And for me, my initial thought was, what if I were to put the syllabus into a chatbot so that if students ever have questions, they can just ask that. And it saves a lot of the work, the student anxiety is all, the faculty time, everyone's time, and just put it into the chatbot. And it will, with properly designed and everything, it can answer those questions. Um, and then there's other things that I'm working with some people at the university, and I encourage everyone to check out. Uh, we're fortunate to have Evan at USF and other sort of faculty and other units, the AI College, who are very interested in talking and supporting each other and to find out what is there. So I encourage you all to find out those resources and try and see what can you do while you're trying to play. Where's that people bridge to technology? Because I think that there can be ways to make this coming out of anthropology, and we can be, you know, at the forefront just as much as computer science and others are. We don't have to just be reacting. We can be, building as well, while still maintaining. And I don't want anyone to forget, while still maintaining the critical understanding of, all of the infrastructural and energy and environmental and ethical and privacy issues that are there. They don't go away. We still have to keep those in mind. But, you know, as a poor translation of the German Marx said, "We make the world, but not according to conditions of our own choosing." So uh, we need to keep that in mind. Um, Anyone else? If we can questions, I have another prompt or two, but any of the panelists want to?
I was just going to add real briefly, I think that the value of specifically, Laura, you were talking about this, but the interdisciplinary nature, I think it's been proving really valuable. I think sometimes we forget that some of the standards we set for our own discipline that feel like, oh yeah, those are core to being anthropologists, might have even come from other disciplines at some point, and then they were slowly they grouped together, they built upon each other, and maybe there's a more anthropology specific version of it. But I'll give you an example. We had a bunch of oral history projects that were coming through our special collections, and for the longest while, we were using Otter AI, a very popular transcription tool. Through that process, our teams who were working with researchers across different disciplines started identifying that either participants in studies and or IRB processes were requiring them to set a higher standard for the tool sets they were utilizing. And so at this point, our team in our special collections only uses a platform called REV. I'll share a link to it, but it's utilized, it's HIPAA compliant, it's utilized by law firms, it's been used by oral historians. And that was something that even in the library, like we had a standard that we were setting, and we were like, this standard needs to be higher. And that was largely through exposure with working with different teams. Something that I've actually started doing over the past few years, and it's actually a reason why Kieran and I connect so much. I'm not his librarian. The bigger thing is that I said, Kieran is working on AI, and I care about AI. We should connect and actually have conversations. It does not matter if I work with him every day. In fact, I shouldn't even technically have to work with Kieran. But because we both grown as a result. We both have more contacts to reach out to that aren't just our department, and it's allowing that growth to happen both faster, but also with different disciplinary angles to it. And I think there's so much value to that, especially if you feel like you don't have that many AI-centric people in your department. It can be very easy to find folks who are also alone, just in a different department.
And that all of this, I love it because it also goes back to a fundamental principle that I believe in. And as an anthropologist, as a person, that no one gets through this world on their own. We always need someone else, you know. So I absolutely am supportive of community building throughout this process. Um,
Could I say one other thing
Please,
before you move
please.
on? And this might come across as harsh. It's not meant to. But my impression, having visited so many different campuses over the last few years in my role with the Anthropology Career Readiness Network, is that anthropologists love to be the ones to initiate something. You know, they've got a new research project, or they met someone who is going to be helpful in securing them funding. So it's more about them reaching out to the people that they see as positive, as potentially helpful to them, as potentially interesting to work with, and so on. So it's like a unidirectional flow, if you will, as opposed to AI, which the feeling I'm getting from them is that it's something that is happening to them and they don't have any control over it. It's being pushed on them. So it's unidirectional in the other sense. And I think that that is where the crux of the problem is, that they don't have enough say in it. Um, and you had raised the question earlier about, can we put on our social science hats and look at this thing? And yes, I think we can, but I think we also have to get over this kind of unidirectional problem that seems to be present. It's okay if I want to do it, but what if I don't want to do it? Then what? And they don't know what to do with that. That's how I'm understanding their reactions.
And that's this. I think if there was a mention in the chat about the dissonance that students feel, but also faculty absolutely of what they feel, and I think that's kind of at the core of what you're talking about is this, you know, and obviously there are different things that have pushed against faculty members. Um, Again, being in Florida, we've had many things for years now being pushed uh, that we haven't agreed with.
Mhm.
Um, and I think even before this latest era, there were things like why we have to do this, and it's just like that's kind of I mean, I don't want to state it too harshly either, but it's kind of part of our life to be in a job where you don't get to like everything you do. And sometimes you just have to deal. Um, and but I think through community we can do this in a way that it doesn't feel so much like that we have to be discouraged or whatnot, but we can feel like maybe misery loves company or something. I'm not sure. Um, okay. Let's see here. What else? There was also a mention I remember seeing in the chat. How are we supposed to teach AI without students basically outsourcing their learning and knowledge and skills to it? Any of you all have a response to this?
I'll go ahead at least and start. And I say this as somebody who supports teaching faculty, but is not officially teaching faculty on my own. I do workshops and instruction content, but is in a slightly different space. But I will say, for a lot of these faculty members, their previous course content was not built within an AI world, and that is putting them in a really tough place because it is putting another onus on them to reevaluate their course content. The bigger thing to me is that it requires them to understand how this technology works in full. I see a lot of misunderstandings about the technology, and as a result, they think certain assignments will work and they think certain assignments won't work. And I think some of the practices that you'll see for faculty who are successfully doing it, whether it's documenting your process, requiring more of a scaffolded approach where you're going step by step by step by step instead of just a long end of semester examination that's a little bit easier to bypass there. I also think understanding the value that AI does bring for certain things like general context, and especially for students who might have skill gaps that they didn't, especially considering like a COVID generation, talking about maybe they're taking on a new method that they haven't tried before. There are valid reasons for them to lean on it. But I think having an open conversation and being informed about what those technologies can actually do makes it so that when you talk to your students about that, maybe they'll actually buy in. Right now, they get a whole lot of it's taboo, it's bad, or go off and use it. I think an instructor who seems more informed than they are about the technology goes a long way, which is not fair to the instructors because it means that all of a sudden we all have to become somewhat AI literate. We all have to know kind of how this affects our field. But that's what the students are looking for. They're getting quality educations many times, and they're looking for instructors who say, "Yeah, you understand what I'm about to go into field wise." I know in the first like year, our comp sci programs, for example, were not immediately reactive to the fact that many computer science students who were going into programming were not going to get a job at the end of the day. AI had taken over that field almost entirely. And that frustrated a lot of students because it felt like they were a little behind the ball there. And I think in that same way for anthropologists, as you all see certain industry members start to use these technologies, it's so key to consider, well, aren't the students going to have that same expectation? And why, if I'm going to stop them, why is that going to happen? Is there something that we're trying to teach them here? And how do we hold them accountable to that? That takes a lot of work, and I'm not doubting that. It's very easy for me to say that as a librarian, but I think it's really where we are is that we really have to start reevaluating some content.
I can believe that perhaps there's this element of a faculty feeling that they have to teach something and they're actually themselves not very well prepared, and they don't understand it so well because there's only that many hours in the day and whatnot. But are we? Perhaps, and again, I'm sorry, this is the non-US perspective here, but is really our anthropology faculty members asked to teach AI in anthropology curriculum or asked to incorporate it as, perhaps, tools and methodological toolbox and whatnot? So can you perhaps um, disaggregate a little bit the panorama for me?
No, I'll let Elizabeth answer that. I can say at USF, no. but I'd like Elizabeth to give her input from her.
Yeah, I don't know that I can really comment effectively on that one, Laura. Sorry.
I mean, I feel like I don't at the University of South Florida, we have not been told to integrate AI. We've had a few conversations. Evan has appeared at a departmental meeting saying this is something, but there hasn't been a mandate. Um,
Okay.
and it's more, um, there's been some, I wouldn't even say, I don't recall a great degree of top-down advice on what to do. Um,
Okay.
the US, Evan, did you do the library guide?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, which I refer to and have sent around our department to say, when it comes to student use or even faculty use, when it comes to citing AI, here's a guide. Evan, if you want to throw that into the
Yeah,
chat.
I absolutely will. And I think, Laura, maybe to touch on that, at least, and again, this is a USF perspective thing, but I have seen something similar at some other institutions, is that it's very grassroots. It is not coming from the top down of here's how we're going to talk about
Okay.
this. We're not providing the trainings to faculty or students either. It is entirely up to the faculty to identify those needs. And as a result, especially when the students are being told this is either a taboo or it's like going to save the world in some way, the students are kind of unsure where it fits in, especially when they see a career field on the other side of this program that might be using it, or maybe it isn't using it yet.
Right.
And it puts the onus, maybe not officially placed on the faculty, but it's putting like a pseudo requirement on them to at least consider this as faculty members. And otherwise, students are either going to bypass that whole class with an AI and just power through it, or they're going to avoid the AI entirely and not pick up on necessary skills that might help them in the field because their faculty member isn't up to speed there, partially because there hasn't been the training for those faculty members.
I'm
Okay.
just
Okay.
looking at the chat, and both Mark and
Yeah.
Sarah are pointing out two very different approaches. So I'm guessing that there's a lot of variation. In some
Right.
cases, like Mark said, Ohio State, and they're expected to train students. And Sarah's at WPI, Worcester Polytech, and they're uh, they're using AI, but not being asked to teach it so much. So, so there's this kind of bimodal, yeah, you need to do it, no, you don't need to do it approach. So in other words, the landscape is mixed, very mixed.
Right.
And
Right.
then, but the other thing that's important to recognize is that when students graduate, they are going to go out and start working somewhere. And in many of the jobs in which they work, they are going to be expected to have some proficiency in AI. So you would
Right.
hope that eventually higher ed would catch up with what the expectations are for the job market.
Laura, I'm curious
The
for,
reason,
oh, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry. No, I was
go
just
ahead,
going to
go ahead.
say, I was going to say, for your institution or colleagues in the EU, are you guys seeing that there is a little bit more of a standardization of like the trainings on AI that you're providing or guidance, or is it very grassroots? Each of you are kind of figuring it out program by program.
I think it's very fragmented as well. Perhaps even more so than in the US, because in the US at least you have the same kind of what is it? Mm, Organizational structure of universities, whereas in Europe, if you're in Spain, it's one kind of structure. If you're in Germany, different kind of structure. So even I would say even more fragmented. But the reason that I was asking was because, well, my first thought when Kiran asked that question was that to ask anthropology faculty to teach AI on top of teaching what they actually should be teaching is just plain unfair. And again, I was quite surprised. But then the second thing that I was thinking is, that I think it's very easy or fruitful or appropriate to take a leaf from STS pedagogy and from the kind of turn lately where we are thinking with more than human, with more than human actors and agents. And, I would say AI is good to think with, and then what's necessary. And I think we can, that is perhaps an intuitive proposition to think about how we're teaching and incorporating, AI into throughout the curriculum. Um, but also, I think, and there I'm very much with Elizabeth, and with the question of what happens at the end in terms of employability and preparing students for the job market. I think AI is very much good to build with. Um, and I think there is perhaps a very critical lack of capacity. I think on the question of the pressure to teach AI fluency and AI literacy, I can see that starting to crop up also in Europe. Again, it's not uniform. And I also have seen calls by colleagues who are saying, well, it actually should be critical AI literacy, and we're well equipped to do that. But again, even though I agree with that push, I would also say, we and this is probably going to sound harsher than it is, but we cannot simply prepare students to be wonderful critiquers, because I think that is not a very good employability position at the end, I think. There's the pressure for the AI literacy, and perhaps there's a bit, perhaps it's a bit unfair. And I think, yes, to the push of critical AI literacy, but also I think we need to open up also this conversation about the actual employability prospects that come out of at the end of the program, right? So that was just.
And that point you're making, Laura, is, I think, a really core part of what anthropology has done. So there's a very strong element of critique within anthropology. Um, the importance of diagnosing what the heck is going on in this research setting or in my classroom or whatever it is. Um, and we're not seeing yet enough focus on, okay, so now we know and understand what is going on. We've done a thorough critique. What do we do about it? What's
Yeah,
the next step?
yeah,
What's the solution
yeah.
if solution is required? And so, I think you have hit at the core of anthropology and its image. It is understood as a discipline that critiques and not and it doesn't have the reputation yet or completely yet of a discipline that solves problems.
And
I agree.
I think this is well, I'm of like any good a scholar. I'm of multiple minds about that because on one hand, yes, I totally see. On the other hand, maybe it's the way that I was trained or whatnot, but and maybe it's because I was trained in applied anthropology. I'm at an applied anthropology program. Like it's yeah, we're all about trying to, solve problems and do things. And so I think there's to some degree goes back to what we are teaching in the classroom and how we're framing things and what's the canon of this. If we say that, yes, certainly, I've even said it at the SFAAs that it seems to be that there's a lot of critique becoming an industry within anthropology. Um, and it's not to say there's anything wrong with critique. I'm highly critical of of things with AI and elsewhere. But we need to, that's not all. I was never told just to say what's wrong. It's also what's next. Um, and to that, Elizabeth, I wonder from your experiences and with Acorn, the Career Readiness Network, have you seen departments that have dealt with this in a productive manner? And if so, what are the sort of traits of those faculty members or departments that have been successful at working on these issues?
Well, the way in which Acorn tries to help departments and programs in anthropology is by pushing instructors and students to connect with people out in the community, which many of them are already doing, but connect with them in a very specific way so that you are working on an issue of interest to that community client, to that community partner. That community partner may work inside of an organization that has a turnover issue. Okay, so it's not you bringing your idea to the community partner, it's you listening to the community partner about turnover, let's say, and saying, okay, I think we can help you. Let me have my class work on this issue that you have, and we will develop a presentation for you by the end of the semester with some very clear recommendations, actionable, feasible recommendations. So that's one of the ways that we recommend that higher ed connect with communities to work on community related issues that have this problem solving component. And so far, we've done 14 of these class projects, which have a client, and we take the cue from the client. It is not the instructor or the faculty member's problem, it is the client's problem that people are working on.
Excellent. Well, and I do want to, we're almost at 1 p.m. and I want to make sure that we address some of these things that are coming up in the chat. But I did have a few other things that are, um, rooted in the higher ed practicality of things. Um, what should, there's talk of like AI literacy, and what is that? What would be the fundamental things that we think that they should know? Um, Either from an intellectual, understanding or a practical or whatnot. What should they know about AI if they're graduating as an undergraduate versus a graduate student? Or any insight onto that?
I'm going to give a very librarian's standpoint here because we study the information literacy like space pretty aggressively, but I think information literacy is at the core of this. I do think data literacy plays a huge role. I think there's honestly many sub-literacies that you could look at, but I do think information literacy, specifically thinking about how does information get gathered, curated, interpreted, shared, reinterpreted by these models in some capacity. I think helping students understand how these models actually work from the training data that they're pulling together, the turning that into a pattern model, helping them understand that, like, for example, I do a lot of work trying to help people understand that they're never truly interacting with ChatGPT's core pattern model, but that there's an interface on the front end, and that many platforms like Copilot, for example, and others will use ChatGPT's pattern model, but through its totally different interface with different limits and restrictions. And many of those things are caught up in documentation. Sometimes it's finding out just through use and finding those limits ourselves. But trying to push that kind of angle a little bit more of having people critically evaluate where's the information coming from and what is the AI doing along the way. For example, especially in anthropology work, qualitative research is huge, obviously. And AI, unfortunately, does a lot of reinterpretation of content and might inadvertently be risking a lot of really great qualitative data by allowing it to take over that review process. These are really important things we have to talk about, and they're going to go field by field. But I think for folks in the field, I think that's really the kind of knowledge that I want both faculty and students to pick up on is that each one of these systems is different, and each one of them is interacting with that information in different ways.
I'm gonna go Elizabeth go first because I think maybe my answer might piss people off, and I'll give them the chance to tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I don't know. I kind of think of this from a personal perspective. What do I think I need AI for? So I was going to give a paper, oh, it was probably, I think it was last June in Montreal. And the conference rules were you either do your presentation in French or you have your slides in French. And of course, I'm right up to the last minute trying to finish the slide deck before I go. And so I thought, okay, my French is okay, but I decided I would put the slides, I would have the slides in French because I think that would just be better. So I just put it into AI and I got a presentation out of it, which basically saved me, I guess you would say. Now, was that translation great? Well, I looked it over and it sounded pretty good to me. So when I got there, I just, made an announcement at the start and said, this was translated by ChatGPT. So please, take that into account. If you see something that doesn't look right or sounds funny to you, you can thank ChatGPT. And so here was a situation where I was up against a wall and I needed a solution fast. And that's the solution I found. It was efficient. It was reasonably effective. The presentation went okay. So when I think about this general question that Kieran posed, I what should students know about AI? Well, they should know enough to know if they need to use it, I guess is how I would answer that.
I agree. So again, perhaps because I move in entrepreneurship circles and I'm very much interested in what are the overlaps between startup world and anthropology as a knowledge production field. If I don't think about AI for a second, right? If I go back to the question of critique and the role of critique, an anthropological critique in the world, and if I have to think about how that materializes and manifests in what it does, right? The biggest example of what we have built with that critique would be probably Occupy, right? And the building tools for Occupy as a critique of a particular system, of a particular historical moment, has been, space and physically occupying that space with bodies and making a statement about, neoliberalism and the political economical moment and all of that, right? Okay. So if we had to think about this is an example of something we have, and whether you like it or not, I'm not going to go into that, right? So whether you're a fan of the Occupy movement or not, just bear with me in that example of this is an example of how we have manifested and materialized quite physically into the world anthropological critique, right? So if we have to think about the the moment of AI and what it enables and what it constrains, right? I think we need to look at it and ask that same question. How does AI help me and my student manifest the critique? What kind of critique will I build into the world, for the world, right? How will I manifest it through AI? And so, in that sense, I think it's absolutely important to teach students AI as a method, AI as a partner to think with. Yes, there's the technicalities of, author does one thing and perhaps, there's an app that makes really great slides. And, like there's so much product out there that's now AI powered, right? That potentially makes life easier or more crowded or whatever. But the point is, and this is where I think it will piss people off, I think students need to graduate, yes, anthropology students, knowing two things, or at least having attempted to build a model themselves. And that can be super easy or very hard. And I'm not saying, like I just think that students need to understand at a technical level exactly what they can do. They need to identify, okay, I'm gonna critique X, whatever it is. The use of I'm gonna critique bias in LLMs or whatever it is. And then they need to ask the question, well, how am I gonna intervene materially? How is that gonna manifest into the world? And how is AI gonna help me do that? And so that means they need to understand it at a fairly technical level, maybe not learn Python, maybe get a buddy. We really need, as anthropologists, to start teaming up a lot more. And I mean, I know that perhaps, especially when I speak to applied anthropologists, that's speaking to the, preaching to the choir. But for very elite programs, I know that this is still very much, the anthropologist is a lone hero, kind of, and the lone thinker. So I think that needs to change. So I think, yes, the short answer is students need to have at least attempted to build a model so that they understand where the model lives, what are its building blocks, what capacities they can bring to it, and what they can absolutely not. I'm not saying every anthropologist has to know Python. I don't. I know a little bit of R, but I mean, I have a company that my Python skills are so basic that I can't even say there. Right, so there's only that much that you as an individual can learn, but that's okay. You need to know those limits. You need to know how you've experiment a little bit. And then the second thing is, based on that, thinking about careers and employability and, very basic things like putting food on the table, to kind of see how AI as a vector and as a technical system that allows anthropological thinking to do some things and not others, perhaps, how does that allow you to navigate, I think, a labor market that's going to be increasingly moving away from the kind of career model that we've had? And I don't know if Elizabeth will, probably you have something to say about that, more towards what I see and I believe will be the case is a more portfolio kind of roles where it's not climbing the corporate ladder someplace, but being really versatile, right? And so how is this dual engine that you're going to have at the end, the AI that has been whether happily embraced or pushed down your throat at school, what does it enable for you? And how does that's the one engine, and the other engine is your very classic anthropological thinking about thinking in different terms, thinking in juxtapositions, standing up for the strangeness of the world and promoting cosmopolitanism and all of those things that speaking truth to power, right? So what is it that you're going to build? What is it the students is going to build at the end of their education with anthropology and with AI? That's something that I think that's a question that I would say is good to consider at a from a faculty perspective.
Yeah, I
And now
agree
if
with
I
you.
pissed you off, you can just tell me no, Laura, you're wrong. It's perfectly
Well,
fine.
I agree with you. And the only thing I would add to that is that it is the case, at least in the US, that students today will have multiple different careers during their lifetime. They will not have a career in a single organization. That would be highly unusual. So that means that they're going to have to adapt to different circumstances. And each time they find themselves in a new work setting, there will be different responsibilities and different expectations. I think AI will be part of that, or I know AI will be part of many of those settings. And so given that we think that is going to be the case, because it is already the case in so many workplaces, how do you, the individual, then build your knowledge base with AI, about AI, critiquing AI, et cetera, so that so that you are able to do your new position successfully?
Yeah, yeah,
I would just add a final note there. Laura, you talked about like having students and I guess faculty like build out custom AI solutions. Maybe they can be low intensity projects and stuff, but I think that's really something that I think we need to emphasize is that we've been far too passive with this AI stuff, and there are means and really accessible low code tools to
yeah,
building custom
yeah,
solutions that can drive our own fields forward. I've seen it happen in healthcare and education alone, where they have built out evidence-based practice tool sets or class prep tool sets that are built to standards within their fields. And I see no reason anthropology can't do the exact kind of same stuff. I will say there is only so much expertise and so much time to teach these kind of things in the university environment. And so I will say that I think that leaning on or asking for more support from our academic support units, whether it is libraries or it is IT units. IT units, I don't think have historically had to help in these ways. So for some, it's difficult. But I think that need is really, really helpful. Folks like Kieran, for example, are trying to do custom AI solutions, and having a team who knows what they're talking about on the back end and can walk through some of those troubleshooting steps with those folks is going to make it so we can take on way more. Having anthropology faculty on their own handle all of that is a huge ask with a limited amount of time.
yeah.
And so I think if we can lean on those support units, I think we can maybe make up some ground.
And I'd like to add something related to what you all had mentioned, uh, and it's also related to something that came in the chat. We should also be leaning on, if they still exist, these centers for teaching excellence or whatever they call them in your institution. They keep changing names here, but uh, whatever the part of your college or university setting that is dedicated to helping people, helping faculty teach. Because I think, as I mentioned earlier, when you get your PhD in anthropology, although there may be program specific opportunities, we're not taught to teach. And so sometimes we do it just based upon what our advisors did and we borrow from someone else or whatever, but we don't ever actually go through and think, what are we doing here? What do we want to do? And I think we can rethink some assignments, rethink about from the what is the objective? What do students to do? The outcomes that Laura and Elizabeth had talked about, and think, oh, well, if we want this, then we can maybe use AI to do this, but this will require the sort of, interdisciplinary cross campus sort of conversations to say, oh, well, then I want to do this. And of course, yes, that does require more time and dedication, but I think it can be very useful. Um, Let me just think of it just practically before we kind of open up and look at the chat and other questions. Let me just share a couple of things that I've also been working on and where I've used AI. Um, oh yeah, Evan just put in the library guide. This is what I think is very helpful. Um, so in while I'm trying to work on this course companion to help out with either syllabus issues or I'm going to have to talk with them and see if I feel comfortable with doing other sort of learning projects and things using that. What I've done is I have an assignment that I teach at a grad seminar where I ask students to basically reverse engineer their favorite article. This is a grad seminar on theory, contemporary anthropological theory, cultural anthropological theory, grad seminar. And I taught this before the pandemic and before generative AI agents, and now I'm teaching it again. And so I said, reverse engineer your favorite theory article so you can actually learn how they wrote the article and kind of identify what you liked about the article by stripping all the content. So if you're reading about decolonizing anthropology and you read the introduction by Faye Harrison's in Faye Harrison's book and you're reading that, I really like this. Well, okay, I don't ever want to see the word decolonizing in your reproduction of it. You just write, this is the writing and this is what this person did. So you can start to see the mechanics and how they make their arguments and how everything fits together. Now, I did that before. I just thought it occurred to me students could use AI and do that just like that. They could just put in that prompt and then generate it, and then they are done. So I said, well, let's do two things. Let's integrate that cheat into the assignment. So I said, you do this, write out your line by line, you know, of the entire article of what you think it is. Then you ask some generative AI agent to do the same thing. And then you write a comparison between the two and say, what's the difference? What's the strengths and weaknesses? And basically be critical of those two things.
Mhm.
And so you're effectively teaching on several different levels through that. So that's one exercise I do. The second thing I did is I had students um, in that same seminar, I had them, and I did it in undergrad course too. I said, okay, here's this reading. Draw me a picture of the reading. I don't care if it's an infogram or you want to do like a cartoon or whatever it is, do that. And then, and then if students actually came up with this, they're like, what if I fed this, scanned the drawing, put it into an AI thing and see what the AI could do with my drawing? I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. And so they're learning again what they can do with AI and they're interacting with the material. So it's reinforcing things on several levels. Um, but it's again, what's the point? What do we want them to do? And it's so those are just two activities that I've done, and I'm going to be working on more of this sort of stuff and talking with other people. I have other appointments to meet with people to talk about what they're doing. Um, but these are ways to kind of see about what faculty can do, what we can get students to do, that will get them familiar, to get them thinking about what they might be doing after they get a job. And so, before we open it up to the audience in the chat, do any of my panelists, I want to give you each a word here. Just sort of final thoughts of what you think, anything about what we talked on so far before we just get into opening it up. Anything we missed or anything you wanted to talk about?
No, I think the biggest thing is just we need to keep having these conversations. Like this might feel like a great conversation today, but this conversation needs to keep happening like every month for probably ever, but at least in the foreseeable couple of years. We have to stay on top of this, and it can't be administrators telling us how to do it. It can't be corporations. It needs to be actual anthropologists and people in the industry and students as well. It needs to be a collective conversation, and I think that this is a great start, and we can keep pressing forward. If anybody is interested as well, I'll throw my email in chat. But if anyone is interested in reaching out, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about, at least within the research space. I also research it myself and publish on it. So I'd love to talk with anybody at any point. But thanks for having us.
Laura, Elizabeth, anything you all didn't wanted to talk about, didn't get a chance to, or
I think we covered a lot of ground.
yeah.
So it'll be interesting to hear what participants have to say. I've been following so much of what is going on in the chat. I mean, we could go on for many more hours.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And I think that what Evan said about we need to stay with this conversation a lot longer um, is absolutely right. I'll just look, I know it sounds cheesy, but I believe it's there is wisdom in the old saying that problems are opportunities. And I think that anthropologists actually are really well positioned to kind of switch this, to kind of switch the optics around, right? And so Yes, I think there's a lot of institutional pressure, and I think there's a lot we don't like about the way this is rolling out in our professional lives. And those are problems, but I think we're also trained to see things from a different perspective, and we should also apply that to AI and to the problems that we think are happening with AI in our day-to-day work, and see it as an opportunity. And really think about what are the opportunities for anthropologists in this situation, which can look so unpleasant in the beginning and so stressful and so overwhelming. Um, which, I mean, again, there's so much out there that I also find it hard. And mind you, I work in hardware, and that's even a lot more than just the AI component, right? So that's physical machines. So it's just a lot out there to stay on top of. So it's very easy to get overwhelmed and to get into a fall back into a space where perhaps it's easy to be resistant to this kind of change. But my hope is that colleagues are going to see it as an opportunity to find new spaces and new scales for anthropology through AI, which it hasn't had current until now. So that will be my final message for colleagues.
Okay. Well, let me see here. We have a question in the Q&A, and then I'll keep looking through the chat to see what we haven't touched on. So the Q&A says, what would you recommend in terms of implementing AI as a tool of learning facilitation in cross-comparing articles based upon students' previous understanding of the reading? I'm looking to implement strategies in teaching as an adjunct for the first time. Um, any ideas?
Yeah, right off the bat, my first thought is using something like a Notebook LM or other reviewer kind of tools where you can look at content for free. That's a big thing as well, as we want to make sure these tool sets are as accessible as possible to our students. I think the bigger thing there is if we're going to be bringing in a tool set like that, we have to talk a little bit about like how it does interpret. We have to talk about some technical terms, like for example, token limits or like capacities at that rate, the way that these models even like read through content and understand it, the pattern-based approach. One of the bigger areas I see hallucinations anymore isn't necessarily in something being just wrong. It is in something being overly generalized, or under-generalized at that rate. And these are important things to note. That isn't to say that isn't a great kind of practice there, and especially if you're trying to get through literature really fast and have conversations about it. I think that's a really great tool to use, but I think it's important we understand how we're changing the information through bringing it into the AI.
And I wanted to mention something about bringing the information into AI as I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues this morning about how, and this is bigger than AI, but oftentimes AI is producing things based upon what is put in, right? It's input in, and you put things in and you get things out. And he was talking about his research in the northeast of the United States, and I was talking about my research in the Caribbean. And there's this certain um, notion about history that was put forth in the Caribbean context. It was about the division between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And this people said this happened according to this treaty. Um, and I remember a footnote from a historian said that's not actually true. So I went back and looked at this, 18th century document in 18th century Spanish, in 18th century orthography, and reread this thing in government speak, uh, which was really difficult to do. But I did it, and I realized that there's this it's incorrect. It's basically incorrect information that people are saying this treaty did this, but in fact, it didn't do that. And I read through it and it's like, it doesn't actually say anything about this, dividing this island between these two countries. Nowhere. It doesn't even make reference to to that island. And so when I going back and thinking about it and thinking about what he was telling me, so much of what I read is being reproduced through written sources. And AI effectively then would be reproducing this, right? Unless for some reason someone put in the original treaty in the original Spanish. Um, but that would be the only way. Otherwise, so I think that there's the risk of having things that false ideas reproduced. And so I think the bigger picture is to think about if we just go upon that and we don't push students to go back to the original source, right? Whether it's reading an article and saying this is what this says or whatnot, they need to go back to the original source and get to it. And I think it's bigger than AI, but it's, I think, equally as relevant. So let's see here. What do we have in the chat? There was a question about social science approaches to AI. I just finished going through a book. Let me pull up the title here. It was called The Handbook of Critical Studies of Artificial Intelligence. It came out in 2023. It was a massive book, 900 something pages. And it was mainly people out of Europe. There were a few people from the Americas, but mainly out of Europe. And it was very much, and unabashedly so, they said, we need critique of AI not linked to industry. To basically say, we don't want to be involved with industry. We just want to be from the academic position and critique this.
Hmm.
Okay. And like I said, and on one hand, like I'm like scratching my head. So why you just that I don't like that idea. Let me just be straight. Um, on the other hand, I recall what one of the speakers at the panel at the SFAA, Kate Seek, had mentioned, and she had said that industry needs anthropologists not who do methods, but who have systems thinking, who actually have theory, and so that the industry needs people who are thinking about all these details and things and critique and all this sort of this is a shortcoming, this is a shortcoming. So on one hand, uh, I kind of rolled my eyes when I read that. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you don't want to have anything to do with industry, but at the same time, I hear industry saying we very much need these critiques because we don't have the time and money to do that sort of research. And so they're like, we need that. Um, so that's one book that I've read. There's lots of stuff that's been coming out about social science approaches to AI, looking at environmental. At the SFAAs, there were several panels that dealt with land use and resource and water use, um, ethical issues and privacy. There's been a lot of that been talked about. You all have any comments on the approach of social science approaches to AI?
Based on what you just reported, and I've not read this book, but I think that it's never a good idea to section off a whole part of society and say we want to be over here by ourselves playing on our schoolyard and not letting anybody into our schoolyard. I don't see the benefit of that.
Absolutely. I mean, if anything, what I've been saying is exactly the opposite to that. So, I think, yeah, absolutely agree with Elizabeth. And I don't know, again, because I think the moment is so overwhelming and it's happening at a time when there's also so many other things going on in the world, and uncertainties, and sensibilities are being kind of undone. Um, I think it's very easy. I mean, I find, and that's not only, I also find that this is true also for journalism. I think it's true also for, not necessarily only within the context of anthropology departments and the university. I think it's very easy for people to just have a increasingly emotional response, or to allow an increasingly emotional response to color their reactions and their positions. And I think that this is dangerous, because, as Elizabeth said, no good comes of saying, like, we're gonna draw these battle lines, and and that's gonna be it. So that's not a position that, and again, I also haven't, I should say, I haven't read that book. Um, Probably now I will.
It's it's a big thing. I didn't read all the chapters. I read the intro and I looked through the chapters and at the ones that were of interest. But I remember that particular quote. Um, let's see if I, it says, uh, where my note is on it. But it basically, when I read that, I was like, this doesn't seem like. I mean, I understand it on one hand. On the other hand, I don't. So. Um, Also in the chat, there was something, it was part of a conversation. Someone talks about AI detectors picking up papers being 100% generated, and it raises the whole issue about use of AI, and the sort of the bad AI usage, right? And faculty trying to say we need to, stop them from cheating, and students are saying we need, we don't want faculty to use the AI for grading because that's cheating, and like, um, I don't know what do you all think about as far as AI detectors and and trying to deal with this issue of plagiarism.
I've seen varied success with them. Frankly, they're pretty inconsistent, at least with the risk for false positives with a lot of them. Frankly, because they're trying to detect some patterns that are frankly easy to avoid. There's even, you can frankly tell an AI to de-AI content to make it to not use typical patterns that it tends to use. I think the bigger thing here is that it feels like it's putting trying to put a band-aid on something to like fix this AI problem. And in reality, I think that's where we go back to. We've got to relook at how we're doing our coursework. What are we trying to teach students? Also, like, where are the students' priorities? If they feel like maybe if they're up against the wall and they have barely any time, like you do as a faculty member, they might be like, this makes a lot more sense to do this discussion post with an AI model. We have to give them good reason to actually care about their education. Otherwise, they will offload it. I think there was chances to do that before AI, and I think that we're just been more exposed by it and we know fully the risk. I think trying to beat it at its own game is the wrong thing. I think we need to play a whole different game. And that starts at how we're even teaching in the first place. And it takes work.
Absolutely agree with that. I think it's getting also a bit silly in, having to be the AI detection police. And I mean, you also see it in comments on peer review, right? So I'm currently editing something, and editing several things, and then every now and then there's gonna be a peer reviewer, saying, yeah, but like the author is using a series of three, and that's like there are these things that these norms that are, and I think it's getting silly precisely because, I mean, series of three used to be, like the classic rhetorical a tool for being, eloquent and very, convincing and, substantiating. And now series of three is, becoming kind of a giveaway for maybe AI use, right? Maybe not. Maybe just the person that was really good at rhetoric and was trained in writing with series of three. So, it's becoming a bit silly. And I think what Evan just said about, especially within the context of teaching, um, I think I absolutely support that sentiment that we have to give students, the reasons for using AI or not using AI, and their own education and figuring out um, you know their own kind of way through all of that ticket. Um, yeah, so
Elizabeth, you want to throw anything out there or not?
No, I think what both Evan and Laura have said is well said.
Okay. I wanted to think of a couple of things, mention a couple of things that I'm reminded of what I read about airport security. Uh, and this was years ago. There was a piece that political scientists wrote about the desire to have airport security. We need to have this, and we'll need to up the security, and this will make us safer. We do up the security, and this will make us safer if we keep doing this. And they said, basically, that's kind of what Evan was talking about. It's kind of like this is a losing battle because whenever you set the bar here, then people know the bar is there, and then we'll find ways to go around it. Uh, and so it's kind of a losing battle and putting focus on things that are, superficial at best. Um, the second thing I wanted to mention was that I remember reading there was some blog post someplace about there's a scholar from Southern Africa. I don't remember if it was Kenya or Tanzania. Uh, that they mentioned that I don't write like AI. AI writes like me uh, because of the way that they were trained to write in English, oftentimes
Right.
mirrors the way that AI is producing text, and so it produces all these, false positives, where in fact it's not that. It goes to the sort of cultural dynamics of making a cultural anthropologist and how do you make a professional to write in a particular way, right? And so that's also Kenya. Thank you. Um, and then the last point I wanted to make is that, and it's similar to what other people had said, is that as a faculty member, I am not. It was not in my contract, nor do I care to try and hunt down to see if whether or not students are cheating. That is not where I want to spend my energy. A fundamental principle of mine is that I'm not responsible for my students' learning. I'm there to facilitate learning. I'm there to present information. I'm there to be a mentor and whatnot. But if the students are wanting to take shortcuts, uh, my energy is spent better elsewhere than trying to figure out whether they're not there. That's taking these shortcuts, you know. And so I think I've said at some point, if a student can write or if a student can produce an assignment that is good enough to using AI that it fools me into thinking that the student wrote it, bravo. Like, okay, great. It doesn't affect me in any long-term way. And it's more about the student and the student learning. And if the student isn't learning and engaging, then that's on the student, not me. So, um, let's see here. There's no such thing as proof that a student has used AI, unless they tell you. And there actually have been cases, I can't say very much about these, where people have admitted to using AI in different undergrad, grad, professional level things. And that's all I can say about that without betraying privacy and confidence. But yeah, but I think again, I think it's not worth our time to be focusing too much energy on detecting plagiarism. And there wasn't before AI. Students were going to cheat, they're going to cheat. Those who are going to cheat will cheat. Those who are not going to will not. Um, all right, we're at
No, I agree. I agree completely.
Yeah,
And
I
I
think.
think the
Go
example that you gave of structuring the exercises as, um, as working with AI and figuring out, okay, now I do it by myself, now I do it with AI, and now I write something comparing. I think there's also a way to kind of perhaps control a little bit in terms of how you are limiting temptation or the possibility to play, to use AI, but I agree that there's, it's very difficult to find proof or absolute proof, and it's also very difficult to actually enforce all of these rules in a sane way. So yeah.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I noticed there are a couple of people who are from the NSF AI and Anthropology cohort, and then some of you might say, "What is that?" And if you're saying, "What is that?" then it's not you. Um, but so I want to thank the panelists for being here and spending time and sharing. Thank the audience members for your engagement with the chat, and thank you all for supporting this initiative. And well, Matt and are in conversation to see about what we'll do about this sort of initiative, and I'll think about doing it as well as maybe teaching related to faculty and teaching in anthropology. So uh, just stay tuned. I'm going to save the chat so that we have that. Um, and yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is now in the chat. Yeah, thanks again. Enjoy your afternoon. Enjoy your weekend. And I'll stick around for those people who are in the NSF group.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
for having
Thanks,
me,
everybody.
and
Thanks,
great
Laura. Thanks, Evan. Thanks,
conversation.
Elizabeth.
Yep.
Bye.